we will go to our Midrash. I hope you've been enjoying the study of the book of Hebrews. I certainly have enjoyed preparing it. Our Father, be with us as we go through these different admonition, advice, and counsel from our first century leaders. So, in the past weeks, in this letter to the Messianic congregation of Israel, we have studied and learned about Yeshua being greater than the angels, about Yeshua being greater than Moshe, about Yeshua's greater Shabbat, about Yeshua being greater, Yeshua the greater high priest, about Yeshua's greater covenant based on greater premises and better promises. We have also learned about the concept of greater faith. That we did last week. A greater faith, that is a faith that stays unwavering and steady, whether we get to see or experience the answers of our prayers and requests or not. That's a greater faith we talked about last week. Doesn't matter. Faith is faith. It's not dependent on anything. That's what we were talking about last week. We remember some of the examples that he brought. Habakkuk, who in faith questioned God, who was not going to deliver Israel from the Babylonian captivity. Also, Abel, who did not see the deliverance from his brother Cain. And we talked about Abraham, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who never saw the fulfillment of Father Abraham's, of the promises given to their father Abraham. And remember that it says in Hebrews 11:1 that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So we talked about that last week. If you want to know more about it, you're going to have to listen to last week's teaching. All the previous teachings are posted as standalone teachings without the service. If you want to have access to them, write me on the address, leave a message through Facebook, go to our page, Yedidei Adonai, write it here on the comment stream. But these are all posted as standalone classes. And I did this study at this time because I think it's very relevant. What we're going through as a Messianic congregation is very relevant to our time. This teaching is very relevant to our time as what we're going through as a Messianic congregation. So, after giving these examples of Habakkuk, Abel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, in Hebrews 11:13 we read, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised." These all died in faith, not having received. That's what made their faith. They still believed while they didn't receive. We think faith is getting answers to your prayer, but actually what it says here is faith is believing when you don't get it. It's really important. That's where we stopped last week. It says, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar. Hey, promises! I'm coming. You're coming. I know it. But having seen them and greeted them from afar, having acknowledged that there were strangers and exiles on the earth. So that, you know, the verses before we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who while living in the land that was divinely theirs by divine right, they're still not there. It's still not theirs. They're still guests under foreign occupation. You know, so it says, they believed in these promises while they were strangers and exiles on the earth, on the land. So, again, these people never saw nor experienced a tangible answer to their prayers. It all remained in the realm of unseen hope, like Hebrews 11. The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. These promises remain in the realm of unseen hope. Our letter writer will now continue speaking of these people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and others too. As we go through these examples of faith, remember the context of the letter. Hebrews 11 is a great chapter that's often used as a standalone, but again, while the word can sometimes be used as a standalone, it is very important to understand the context in which it is given. The context, the culture in which it is given. If not, we can get very wrong interpretations. And again, here the context is a letter to encourage those believers in Israel in the first century, those whose hopes were being shattered by government restriction, economic hardship, persecution, and harassment, to encourage those people who have all reasons to think that God may have abandoned them, or that they put their faith in a pipe dream because everything was going so bad. The letter was an encouragement to them, to this sort of people. Why do they feel like this? Those people felt that way because it looked like Hashem did not protect them from the Romans, from the other Jews. And it looked like Hashem was not heeding and answering their prayers. That's why they felt that way. I mean, have you never felt that way? That you pray, and it never comes. In the end, you will go, forget the whole thing. That's how they felt. So, as a means of encouragement, instead of bringing to this desperate congregation examples from the Torah, examples when Hashem did answer prayers and did miracles, such as Hannah's prayer for a child. Hannah, who was barren. Or such as the deliverance of Jerusalem from the Assyrian army, when in the morning the whole army fled because God fought them during the night. Or bringing things like Abraham's request for a descendant, which he got when he was 100 years old. The opening of the Red Sea. I mean, those are stories to encourage faith, but that's not what our writer brings. That's not the type of example that our writer brings in order to encourage their faith. Instead, he gives them examples of people who died who died in faith while never receiving an answer to their prayers. That's what they needed to hear, because that was happening to them. I mean, what if you pray, and never answer your prayer? You don't get an answer to your prayer, somebody tells you, well, look at so-and-so, he prayed, God answered. It's going to make you feel great, right? I think it's going to make you feel even more discouraged. So, well, what's wrong with me? I must be very bad. You know, I remember thinking that way. And one time I was very sick with asthma, and I prayed so much, and God was not answering. And one time I felt, oh, maybe God doesn't love me so much. You know, and I had this relationship with God where I felt if I didn't make too much noise, He won't notice that I'm around. You know, that's very unhealthy. That's very bad. I had to learn otherwise. Here, faith, I had to learn that faith is faith, whether or not you get the answer. So, the examples that our writer uses is examples when people died in faith and never received an answer, while never receiving an answer. That's the examples, that's what he calls the great of faith. It's the faith, it's Yeshua-like faith. The Yeshua who prayed for the cup of the crucifixion to be taken from him. But yet, he said, "Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." That's what he prayed. But then he resigned himself to the deaf ears, to the seemingly deaf ears of his and our fathers, and said, "Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." He asked, but his asking was not a command. You know, if his asking was not according to God's will, he didn't want it. That's greater faith. Maybe God's will for us to be rescued from whatever it is, and it might not be God's will. And faith is, nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. As it says in the King James. This is very important to remember. I think it's falling off. Faith is not measured by the answers we get to prayers, but in how much faith we retain when our prayers are not answered. You know, faith is not measured by the answers to prayers that we get, but in how much faith we retain when our prayers do not get answered. So that's why the writer chose the type of examples that he chose, saying in Hebrews 11:13, they all died in faith, not having received the things promised. He was previously talking of Abraham, who, having never seen the promised land, in the possessions of millions of his descendants, Abraham, whom having been promised a seed that fills the earth, was given one legitimate heir, and that by the skin of his teeth. Abraham, who was required to also kill that miraculous one single descendant, the only one who could fulfill the promises. This Abraham, who never was given the joy of seeing his prayers answered, but was satisfied to solely see them and greet them from afar, while remaining strangers and exiles on the land of promise. Yeshua says, if you're children of Abraham, you need to do the deeds of Abraham. That's the type of faith Abraham had. Not a faith that was dependent on answers, but dependent and submitted on the will of God. Our writer continues, Hebrews 11:14. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. What he's saying is that when people roam the earth, traveling, chasing after a dreamland in the way that might be looking to others as chasing after rainbows, it shows that they do not consider that they belong to this land or to this world. For Hebrews 11:15, if they had been thinking of that land for which they had gone out, in Babylon, that's where Abraham's from, if they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, verse 16, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. How God's not ashamed to have his children as fairway strangers. He's got something for them. You know, it's a little bit like today, we live a certain life because of our faith. And we do it. You know, we could live a different life, you know. If we didn't have faith, maybe we would do things different. Maybe we'd be richer. Maybe we'd be, wow, you know, living it up. But, you know, reminds me a little bit of what's this guy who does the Financial Peace University? Dave Ramsey. He says, live like nobody else, so that in the end you will live like nobody else. I think that applies to this concept too. So these people who search for that quote-unquote wonderland, they may never see it, but they know they have that undeniable faith that God has prepared for them a city, something that is much better than anything else. Shall we give it a name? We have Camelot, the American dream. But this is much, much, much better. Camelot and the American dreams are pale in comparison to what Hashem has prepared for us. Shall we call it the Holy Land dream, Israel dream, the Messianic dream? Whatever you want to call it, Hebrews 11:17. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He was doing the thing that would take away that the fulfillment of that promise that was hanging on just a miraculous birth. There was no chance afterward. But he had so much faith that he was going to even kill that. Hebrews 11:19. He considered that God, listen to that, he considered that God was able to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So I want to go on a little rabbit trail here. On the ESV, it tells us from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. The King James says, in a figure. He says, in a figure. The verse says, Abraham was willing to kill his son, because for him, he said, it was very simple, you know, in Abraham, very pragmatic, Abraham. He says, well, let's see, God told me his promises depend on my one only son, okay? He made a miracle to give me that son. It's certainly not from my doing. So he did a miracle. He wanted to make sure. So now he wants me to kill him. Okay, so how can I kill him while the promises get fulfilled? Oh, simple. God's going to have to resurrect him. Duh. Really, I'm not saying that. That's what he says. He considered that God was able to raise him from the dead. You know, people often, you know, this is a horrible story to teach children. Have you ever taught that? You know, I'm going to tell you a Bible story. And there was Abraham. He loved God so much that he was going to kill his son. Isn't that beautiful, sonny? And the little boy replies, Daddy, do you love God? Oh, yes, son, I sure do. Daddy, do you love God like Abraham? Oh, yes, son, I sure hope so. Daddy, can I go to the orphanage? What a horrible story, especially when you teach it within the concept that it was a love thing, a test of love. It wasn't a test of love. It was a test of faith, but faith in the sense, how much you have faith in God's promises. And Isaac was not a little boy following blindly. He knew what he was doing. He was also giving his life, voluntarily giving his life for the cause, probably believing he was going to resurrect. Just like Yeshua. He did that. Isaac is very similar to Yeshua. He voluntarily gave his life, knowing he was going to resurrect. So you might say, how could Abraham do such a thing while believing in resurrection? Well, his whole faith depended on the belief in resurrection. By the way, just like ours, you believe in a resurrected Messiah. That's what our faith is based on. Our whole movement. So that comes from Abraham. So he says, he considered that God was able to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So this figuratively speaking, if you go to a strong concordance, if you look at the Greek text, it says, it doesn't say in a figure, like in the King James, it says in a parable. Ooh, in a parable? Parabolicistically speaking is not figuratively speaking. A parable, there must be a story behind. A parable is a story that explains something complicated. Well, there is in Jewish text a parable concerning the resurrection, death and resurrection of Isaac. You might say, well, it's not written in the text. I don't want to go too much into that. If you want to know a bit more, you're right, May. But the fact is that there is one. And the fact is that the writer leaned on it. The writer of the book of Hebrew leaned to make his explanation. He leaned on a Jewish Talmudic Midrashic parable that talks about the death and resurrection of Isaac. He used it. So he must have approved it. And before you say, well, that's not in the word, I would suggest you do a bit more research, or you even ask me. Don't look superficially. Don't make superficial judgment on these things. So that was the faith of Abraham. Getting back to our story, Abraham had faith that though he was past age, God could do it. And he had the faith that even God would kill Isaac, God could still fulfill his promises. This was the faith of Abraham, a faith when it was impossible, a faith when it looked like God was not answering prayers. His faith was not based on, did not rest on physical results, but on the word of God who said so. On the word of the God who said so, no matter how it looked on the outside. Do you see why such an idea could help the believers of these days? Do you see why our writer shows that? He says, look, you think God doesn't say your prayers? Look at Abraham. Come on, So, Hebrews 11:20. We continue. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. Here we have Isaac. He had never seen the promises made to his father Abraham fulfilled. Yet, because of the type of faith that he had, a faith that did not depend on seeing the result, he passed on the Abrahamic blessing to his children. Oh, your father Abraham believed that. Yeah, well, we don't have it yet, but here I'm giving you that blessing for you to carry. I carried it all my life. Your turn now. And that at that time when they were maybe going to kill each other, So he here he passed on this blessing to Jacob and Esau, and at that time, whoa, there was no saying what was going to happen to these two brothers who had a little bit of a beef with each other, but Isaac still passed it on. 21. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. So here, same thing. When Jacob was finally settling down in Shechem before he went to Egypt, he might have thought, here we go, finally the promised land, as I'm being able to settle here like God told Abraham. But no, this was the time when Simeon and Levi blew it and caused them to have to leave the promised land. Then the famine came and they had to take refuge in Egypt. They were further back than square one. They were in square minus one. The Abrahamic promises concerning the promised land seemed further than ever, but yet, before dying, Jacob blessed his children in the light of the Abrahamic blessing. He told them, gave them blessing. For him, it was like he had gone backward instead of forward, but yet he was blessing his children in the light of, when you're in the land, basically. That's faith. Hebrews 11:22. Joseph did the same thing. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave them directions concerning his bones. At that time, they should have left already. They were not slaves anymore. They could have gone. The famine was over. Why didn't they go? Already when Jacob died, the famine was over. Why did they go? It was slavery, but shackles of gold. The luxury of Egypt was keeping them prisoner. The abundance, the simplicity of life. Yeah, this is cool. Egypt, who wants to go and start a country? It's a little bit like what happened in the modern day Israel. People could have gone right after World War I, but they didn't. So, we're comfortable here in Europe. Who wants to go start a country there in the sand and blah, blah. It took the Holocaust to fulfill that. And then 11:23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Somehow they believed they saw something nobody else saw. They saw something nobody else saw. 24. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Messiah greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Wow. So here's this guy who was believing so much in something that he had never seen, but he's willing to. He was living in Pharaoh's house. It's like, gosh, Pharaoh's house. He's ready to leave and to go make bricks. To go make bricks with the slaves, with his enslaved brothers and sisters. He thought, that's better. That's the kingdom. That's better than Egypt and the fleeting pleasures of Egypt. Can you imagine? Talk about faith. Moshe somehow must have learned that the crown goes through the cross. That glorification goes through abasement. That the rewards of the Messianic kingdom goes through tribulation and persecution. Again, the crown goes through the cross, glorification goes through the basement, the rewards of the Messianic kingdom go through tribulation and persecution. That's Messianic, that's kingdom dynamics 101. Hebrews 11:27. By faith he, Moshe, left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Look at this wording, seeing him who is invisible. That's like Hebrews 11:1, who says the evidence of things not seen, invisible. Hebrews 11:28. By faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. You see, that was not faith that said, "Do it, Lord, I know you will do it," and then gets totally, why didn't he? But it was the same faith as is found in the words of Joab. There was a time when Joab, David's commander-in-chief, was foreseeing a battle with the Syrians and the Ammonites. He saw that he was going to get, he was being attacked from the front and from the back. So what he did, and you can find this story in 2 Samuel 10, what he did, he divided his forces. He worked with his brother Abishai, and he divided his forces, and then he made a plan with his brother. You can read it yourself. But when he was done with the plan, he told his brother in 2 Samuel 10:12, "Be of good courage, and let us play the man for our people and for the cities of our God, and the Lord do that which seemeth him good." He says, we do our best, but at the end of the day, it's God who chooses what he does. So we may want, we may pray, we may ask, but at the end of the day, if we don't do it in a way that, nevertheless, not my will but yours, or like Joab said, the Lord will do that which seems good to him. Like Yeshua said, not my will but yours. Hebrews 11:30. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. They had never seen walls fall because of playing the trumpet before. It was ridiculous. It was not a faith from seeing, it was a faith from not seeing. Look at Rahab. Hebrews 11:31. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Somehow she had this faith in the unseeable. And many more. Hebrews 11:32 says, "And what more shall I say? Time will fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets." If you read the stories of these people, you will see that their actions were propulsed by a faith in the unseeable, a faith that did not perform for the sake of the answers, but solely for the sake of being told whether what they should do, whether it would be successful or not. 11:33. Who through these people who through faith, that type of faith, who did not rest on answers, through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced Ethiopia was the first country in Africa to be a country of believers. Conquered kingdom, enforced justice. Daniel, Esther, they actually brought the knowledge of the justice of God in Babylon and in Persia. Obtained promises, that's Abraham, or obtained promises. Stopped the mouth of lions, that Daniel. Quenched the power of fire, there's probably many examples, both in the Tanakh and the Talmud, escaped the edge of the sword. You know, there is a story with Elijah and Elisha where, I always forget which one's which, but there were the armies of the Syrians were coming to take, I think, Elijah, and the servant of Elijah was afraid. He told Elijah, look, there's an army against us. And Elijah told him, look behind you, open your eyes. And he saw an army of heaven so enormous that it actually dwarfed the Syrian army. Quench the power of fire, escape the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness. That's Samson. Became mighty in war. Put foreign armies to flight. Abraham was his 300-400 servants and some help. He just put 5 kings away. Women, and 35. Women received back their dead by resurrection. So here he is talking about Jewish history and Messianic history, okay? Messianic history. He's not just talking Old Testament stuff. There was persecution going on already. We can read it in the book of Acts. I think in the beginning of the book of Acts, there was Paul's persecutions, but then there was more. In Acts 13, Herod put one of the Jameses to death. We read in all the story that James, the brother of Yeshua, is put to death. There is a lot. There is a lot. This letter to the Hebrews, I think, was written maybe 2 years before the destruction of the temple. That's my own guesstimate. So we're talking 67 AD. There was a lot of persecution going on. So it's relating to these things too that were happening in those days. And we're talking about women receiving back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, and that was what was happening in those days. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release that they might rise again to a better life. They says, please, don't free me. Don't free me. I want a better resurrection, so please torture me as much as you want, beat me up, and please make sure to kill me. Sounds weird, but I'm not saying it myself. Here he says, some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. That was Moshe, actually. That was Yeshua. That was Paul. That was Paul. Paul could have easily avoided a lot of things that happened to him, but he chose not to. And Yeshua also, he told Pilate, look, don't you think I can call angels that they're going to free me? You can't touch me. You don't take my life, I'm giving it. He chose. And now here's a bit of a punchline here. We should choose. We should not flee away from that. We should, shall I say, welcome it. They did. 1136. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. He's talking about the prophets. He's talking about himself, the writer, probably, and some of the people that were in those days. They were stoned, they were sawn in two. That's Isaiah. They were killed with the sword. They went about in skin of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated. This is about Isaiah, John the Immerser, James the brother of Yeshua, Peter, and many other ones. Those are the ones we know. 38. Of whom the world was not worthy. All these messianic martyrs, he says, of whom the world were not worthy. Wandering about in deserts and mountains and in the dens and caves of the earth. You see, in the days of Jezebel, 400 prophets were hidden in caves. It happened also in the days of the Roman empires. In the Roman Empire. So, it's really important. This is given us as an example to tell us that he's telling them, look, what's happening to you is nothing new. You should have, it's a bit like going to the army and not expecting to have to fight or not expecting to die. If you're enrolled in the army, you may go to the battlefield and you might die. It doesn't mean it was wrong. You went to the army. It's all part and parcel of going to the army. Same thing. Same thing. If you join the movement, we don't come to say, look, for your good life. No. We are for you to come and live and die with us. Are you willing to? That's how we should witness. Do you want to die for your faith? Being tortured and go hungry, be poor? How about that? And many people in those days, to be a believer, that's what it meant. It was social suicide, political suicide. That's what it meant to be a believer. And in some countries today, it's still the same. If you're a believer in Iran, if you're a believer in some places in Africa, some places in Asia, and even if you were a religious person in Israel and you become a believer, many of them, they say many rabbis or even Hasids are closet believers because it's too hard. You know, gotta pray for them. So it's nothing new. He's telling you it's nothing new. We should not think it as something new. We should know that it's part and parcel of our enrollment in the movement. Be now ready for the big conclusion. The big conclusion of the whole matter here. Hebrews 11:39. He says, all the people we've been talking about before, from Abel until verse 39. All these, though commanded through their faith, did not receive what was promised. Again, it says, all these, though commanded through their faith, did not receive what was promised. These are a bunch of people who prayed and never got answers. And he says, wow, what great faith they have. I think it's a bit different what we think about faith, right? That's why their faith was strong. It's amazing. So he's telling them, look, there's people, they're commanded in the text everywhere. You know, everybody glorifies them and they never receive promise. They live lives of destitution and everything. You like them. Yeshua said it once, actually. In Matthew 5, he said, rejoice when you receive all sort of persecution, for so received all the prophets which were before you. You know, Paul said it, rejoice in persecution. James said it, rejoice in. We're not supposed to go fight against it, against restrictions, persecution. We're supposed to rejoice, yes! You know. So these great people of faith did not receive what was promised. And it says why. It says in verse 40, I'll start again from 39. All these, though commanded through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be perfect. The reason why, it says so, we can find many reasons, but the book tells us why. It says why. They did not receive because it was not the time. It was not the time for them to do. They would not, nobody gets to the finish line before the race is over, before everybody had a chance to run. They were waiting for us. You know, he says that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. They don't get to the place just because they were going to be born before us. They don't get to there before us. We all get there together. How that happens, I don't know, but we got to remember, time is a dimension of this earth right now. God lives in eternity. Got to remember that. So it's the same thing. Actually, we see in Revelations, I think it's Revelation 5, there is an altar in heaven that John sees, and there you can see the souls of those who have been persecuted and killed, martyred for their faith, saying to God, Lord, Lord, how long, how long? And they're given white robes, but then it says, rest a little while until your brothers come and join you. It's in Revelation 5, read it. I wrote an article in my book about it, my book on Revelation. So it's a very, this is where it is. God had provided something better for us and for them, and they were not to get there before us. That's why they didn't receive it. Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, so that therefore is a therefore that comes after that whole explanation of faith, and all these people we're told about, Jephthah, Barak, Gideon, Abraham, Abel, everybody has all these people that mentioned in all this whole thing that we learned through Hebrews 11. Now in chapter 12 he starts with therefore, because of what we just learned, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. A cloud is composed of billions of water particles. So he's comparing all these people, not just the few that he mentioned in Hebrews 11, but those plus all the other ones that we don't know. He's comparing them to a cloud. Millions of them. Billions of them. He says, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, he's talking these people are witnesses. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance a race that is before us. Wow, we're going to wrap that. There's a lot into there. So he compares all these people he talked about and those he didn't talk about to a great cloud. Great cloud. Do you remember in Exodus, a cloud was preceding the children of Israel, giving them coolness, helping them. Here he's talking about a cloud. It's not the Microsoft cloud. It's a cloud of witnesses. All these people who died in faith, not having received what they were promised. He's comparing them to the people. He said, like what he's talking about a race. A race happens in the arena. So here we're in the arena running, and the clouds on the grandstand cheering and clapping, yay! That's what he's doing. That's what he's talking about. He's using the ancient Roman arena model. So we have to run the race. And these people who have waited for everything to be fulfilled, they're looking at us and say, oh, maybe it's in that generation that it's going to happen. We're going to finally see it. And they bet on us, they bet on us, And then he says we have to run the race. But then we have to run the race, we have to take off the weights. It says the weights which cling so closely. King James says that so easily beset us. I like the King James wording better. But what happens? Again, he's using the Greek arena, Roman Greek arena, and how the athletes trained. They do it a lot in the same way that people do today, actually. How do people strengthen their muscle today? They put weights on their arm. You have seen people, some of these things you put on your arm to exercise. So they put weight on their ankles, and they ran. They never trained without them. Never trained without them. They put these weights, and this weight were heavy. Maybe they added every once in a while, added more weight. This weight made them limited their strength and their capacity, but at the same time, that's how you build muscle. Opposition builds strength. That's what makes us keep strength. Opposition. So they have these weights, So they would always practice with them. But at the time, when they were supposed to run that race, they would take them off. And then they would fly, you know. So that's what he's telling us. Take off these weights, the sin, the disobedience, the doubt, the murmuring, the complaining, the grumbling that so easily beset us. Take it all away. The unbelief, the doubting. Take it all away. And then run. Run that race with endurance. With endurance means no matter what. You know, I wanted to have that music ready, but I don't, you know. But have you seen that movie, Chariots of Fire? Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. You know, Eric Liddell, you know, he did win the Olympic. What happened is that he received flack from everybody because he refused to run on a Sunday. You know, he observed what he felt was the Sabbath. You know, but when his day came to run, a fellow athlete came to him with a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper there was written a verse. A verse that says, because you have something, I'm paraphrasing, because you have honored my name, I will also honor you. Probably Eric Liddell felt like he had blown it, he was going through it, you know, he offended the king, offended the athletic company he was working for, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh boy, you know. But to me, if I were at that time, if I were here and I would receive that note, it would be like taking the weight, the shackles of doubt that would keep me from flying. And then you see him, you know, he goes and he goes, you know, and he runs and he runs, and you always see him it's very iconic, you know, he lifts up his head as he runs, he lifts his head, you know, and it's like what he says in the verse, looking to Yeshua, the founder and perfecter of your faith. It says, he says, since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight, the sin that so easily beset us, and let us run with endurance like the race that is set before us, looking to Yeshua, the perfecter of our faith. The Yeshua we've been talking about since the beginning of the letter to the Hebrews, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, is sitting at the right hand of God. He never got delivered. He had to go through the whole caboodle. It was part of it. But now he's sitting at the right hand of God, so he says, come on you guys. He's our leader. He's leading the way. And that's what happens to us. We're not here to be delivered from all of our troubles. We're here to go through troubles. He's not going to deliver us from trouble. He's going to be with us in the trouble and help us through it. Boy, oh boy. In essence, he says, quit your complaining. You're not the first, will not be the last. You don't even have it as bad as others did, do, or even will do. Remember, he's speaking to Jews. We are told somewhere in the text, in Scripture, that there will be another set of tribulation, one that is so bad that there will be nobody left unless God put us unto it. It's actually called a tribulation that is worse than the one that ever been. Could that have referred to the Hadrianic persecutions, to the Holocaust, or to something even future? To be honest, I don't know what could be worse than the Holocaust, to be honest. So the writer tells them to stop looking down, but look up to that great Yeshua he just spent 11 chapters talking about. How does this old hymn go? I heard a hymn one time. It goes, turn your eyes on Yeshua, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. And Mrs. Lumbroso, you want to sing it with me? Turn your your eyes on Yeshua. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. That's what he's saying. Looking up to Yeshua, the author and fulfiller of our faith. That's what he's telling them to do. That's what he's telling us to do. And to be honest, this is what our reaction should be to persecution, tribulation, government restrictions, sickness, economic difficulty. So this is great, but there is a reason for it. You see, the Bible always gives us the reason. There is a very important rationale behind this whole pep talk. And that is something that we'll talk about next week. So don't forget to comment and to join us next week, because we'll talk about the reason why we're supposed to do that. But for now, let's do some music and praise our great God.